Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Now, in previous shows we have discussed NASA's Apollo moon missions and presented a comprehensive set of evidence suggesting the Apollo crafts did not land on the moon. If you contend that statement, then please watch these two Richplanet TV shows and see if you still hold that view after you've watched them. Now, in recent months I've been collaborating with researcher Douglas Gibson, who has been investigating more of NASA's claimed projects, namely the Mars exploration missions. Starting in 1976 and up to the present day, NASA have allegedly landed a series of landers and rovers on the Martian surface, which have allegedly sent back photographs and other data to the Earth. Now, I've been working on a hypothesis with the help of Douglas Gibson, which is now running at 50 pages, and you can download it from this link, and it is entitled A Hypothesis: The Opportunity and Curiosity rovers are situated on Earth. In fact, more specifically, the Mars exploration rovers are not situated on the surface of Mars and never left the Earth. As I say, you can download this 50-page document, this hypothesis, from the link on the screen. How many other TV shows would you get a 50-page hypothesis of evidence to back up what we're talking about? Now, here to discuss the claims in the hypothesis is researcher Andrew Johnson. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Richard.
Okay, now I mentioned the moon there, Andrew, and you're, I would say, convinced as you can be that the Apollo never went to the moon. And we've gone through a lot of that evidence as to why you think that. Where do you stand on these Mars missions, Andrew?
Well, it's very interesting to think about because, you know, I have done talks about the Mars missions as well, as you probably know, and some of the viewers perhaps have had a look around on the websites and stuff. So it kind of, you know, once you've broken through the Apollo barrier, if you want to call it that, and you realise that there's no possible way that they could have done what they did, what they claim to have done on the moon, then, you know, you do have to open up yourself to the idea that perhaps because of similar complications with technology, maybe these rover missions, you know, are not as claimed, certainly not as claimed. Mm-hmm. And kind of, I suppose, you know, you've rightly gone forward with your document mm-hmm. to try and explore where we get to when we look at the evidence and try and study it a bit more deeply with this deeply skeptical mindset that we come to, having found out some of the huge problems with the Apollo record.
I found the more I looked, the more the official version of the photographs, the official story behind them, started to fall apart. Right. And it's been 18 months now, and everywhere I look, it's the same as the Apollo missions. I know most people still believe we went to the moon, but if you look really carefully at any single aspect of the science, it just comes apart. In the introduction,
I set out the reasons why the reader should not just dismiss this hypothesis, because a lot of people will do that. And the reason they'll come up with is they'll say, well, why would they do that? There's no logical reason why they would possibly fake a mission to Mars. Well, let's look at the evidence before we decide why they've done it. Let's look at what happened before we look at why they may have done it.
Always a good method, yes.
Yeah, so investigation before condemnation. And we're going to do some of the investigating today. We'll just start by having a quick look at previous alleged missions to Mars. Now, we've got, from 1964 up to the present day, we've got a lot of attempted Mars missions, the majority of which actually failed. Yep. Most of these were either flybys or orbiters, and we've got a number of craft which are currently allegedly in orbit around Mars. It's all in this table on the screen there, and we've got a number of craft which have landed on Mars, starting with the Viking mission in 1976. Just tell us a little bit about the Viking mission, Andrew.
Yeah, so the Viking mission arrived at Mars in 1976, consisted of 2 orbiters and 2 landers, and they were landers rather than rovers. So they, you know, once they got onto the surface, they stayed in the same place. Mm-hmm. Those missions cost $1 billion. Mm-hmm. So, you know, going back to 1976, that's an awful lot of money. Mm-hmm. And they had colour cameras on them. They had a laboratory, chemical laboratory built into them. So one of the projects was to send an arm out into the soil, dig some soil, pull the soil into the, or dust, whatever you want to call it, pull it back into the probe and drop it down into like a sort of chemical analysis laboratory. And they did this labeled release experiment and so forth. So quite sophisticated probes. The missions we were told they were a success. Everything worked. They landed where they were supposed to land, and we got quite a lot of good quality pictures from them.
Right.
It was that mission which first photographed this alleged face on Mars from orbit, not from the surface. They photographed that from one of the orbiters in the region became known as Cydonia.
All right, well, we'll come on to some of the photographs which appear to have been tampered with from the Viking mission. Now, they conked out in the early 80s, they lost their power, what have you, and then we've got a gap up until the mid-90s where we have Pathfinder, and you can see the various different sizes of what were called the Rover missions. So these are vehicles which can allegedly move around the surface of Mars, starting, as I say, with Pathfinder in, I think it's 97.
That's right, 97 is
right, okay, so that only lasted for a year or two.
Yeah.
Then we've got another gap to the mid-2000s where we've got Spirit and Opportunity, which were a pair of rovers, which lasted lasted a good number of years. In fact, the Opportunity rover is still allegedly active. Is that correct? Yeah. So that's, we can see on the screen there the Opportunity rover, and then we then had the Phoenix
lander.
That was just a
lander. That's
lander.
Right, that was, that only operated, I think, for about 3 months or something. You've got that on your graph there.
Yeah.
So
and then the most recent one, which is Curiosity, which we're going to look at the Curiosity and the Opportunity rovers, which are allegedly still
sending back pictures from Mars. Allegedly, yes.
And moving around the surface of Mars. Now, I've got a section on the power ratings of the Opportunity rover, and in the document I compare it to a mobility scooter, because the weight of the Opportunity rover is 185 kilos, which is probably 2 largish people. So it's reasonably heavy.
Yes.
So you would imagine, if you were to compare it to, let's say, a mobility scooter, which I think is probably a good comparison.
Yes.
Obviously, things weigh less on Mars. I think it's a factor of 2.6 times less on Mars. So it's maybe not 185 kilos equivalent load, but a mobility scooter maybe has let's say an 80 kilogram person. It's comparable. Now, a mobility scooter typically consumes around about 500 watts of power. Now, the Opportunity rover is rated at just 100 watts, which is no more than a sewing machine. So, in the other thing which I go into detail in the document is how the batteries are charged with just 2 solar panels, which are delivering just 100 watts only for 4 hours a day, and this system has lasted for 10 years. Now, just think of your laptop battery, right? Because it's probably comparable, or maybe something slightly larger. It lasting 10 years of charging and discharging.
The life of the batteries, because the Opportunity rover is supposed to have been roving around on Mars now for 10 years, powered by one rechargeable battery.
Lithium-ion battery.
Yes, and since when did those last 10 years?
You take those power figures and it does make you scratch your head a little bit. Of course they will argue, you've got highly optimized electronics and drive systems, and we use very low friction bearings in the motors, it's been specially designed for this project and so forth. But when you do the numbers, you start to, like you say, the 100 watts for 4 hours a day, and then also the solar panels, if they're providing 100 watts of power allegedly for, as you say, 4 hours a day, it doesn't seem very much. And also the thing that came into my mind is these things are on Mars, so the sunlight is going to be 20, 30, 40% weaker there. Allegedly the atmosphere is more dust laden, so how much more efficient have those solar panels got to be than they would have to be on Earth.
I mean, here's another interesting fact. The rover's operating temperature is -40 to +40 degrees centigrade. So presumably they've been tested to operate in that range. The average surface temperature of Mars is estimated to be -55 degrees C. That's the average temperatures of Mars. At the equator, which is obviously the hottest point, temperature varies from 20 degrees C maximum to -73 degrees minimum. So the temperature that they're on Mars at, -73, is way below the minimum operating temperature. So,
and that's right. And then you also consider it in terms of, if anybody has ever taken their radio out into cold weather, or a torch, trying to switch it on, you'll find that the battery performance at those sorts of temperatures is very much reduced.
Yeah.
And it's literally got to put it in your pocket to get the battery going again with a pocket torch or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyone can try that. So how are they getting this power system to work?